Hello, Elf from Anella Visuals here, and today we're going to be looking at how to create some, sort of Christmas fairy lights. Going to be using Maya. We're going to be using Mash inside of Maya, and we're using Arnold just to render out a nice little image at the end. So yeah, without further ado, let's crack on. Okay, so I've got Maya open here, and it's a fairly blank scene. I have got a sky dome light in here because we're going to get a render going on. My sky dome light has a texture applied. The texture is a HDR image from Polyhaven. So I would advise, if you want to get a nice little render going on, just to go and grab yourself a HDR image from there and plug that into your sky dome. For now, I'm just going to hide this. I've also got a camera just so that we can change some depth of field settings when we get into the render a little bit more. But for now, we need to just create a really basic model for our fairy light, and not going to be entirely the same, but I just wanted to bring up this image using pure ref here. Bringing up this image because we're going to use the way that this cable looks. Okay, so it twists around. So we've got a couple of different wires and they're twisting around one another. So we're going to create something similar, and then also we're going to create just a really basic Christmas light that we can distribute as well. What we'll get going on hopefully is something that looks a little like this. So yeah, let's get on. So for the model, I'm going to create a polygon cube, and that cube we need to make sure we are set to something like width 3, height 6, depth 3. Just to quickly note that we should make sure when we're working in Mash that our working units are set to centimeters. They are, as a default in Maya, set to centimeters, so hopefully they will be, but had some problems working in meters with Mash, so it's just worth noting at this point. So we've got a really basic cube, and I'm just going to extrude the top and scale it in. Just get a bit of a sort of indent so that when we smooth, our sort of sphere can sit inside that. I'm going to take the bottom and I'm just going to scale that in a little bit, and then if we smooth this, I'm holding shift and right mouse button, and then I'm going to insert edge loop tool. I'm just going to add in couple of supporting edges. So one at the bottom, one at the top. Might get one going on here. Maybe one on the outside. Something like that will work, I think. And then, so that's cool. Let's get a poly sphere, and that's just going to sort of sit at the top. We might be able to scale this a little bit, sort of stretch it out. Something like that looks pretty good for me. Okay, so what I'm going to do is I'm just making sure that I'm deleting my history on these. If we look in the channel box, we've got a load of history underneath our input, and we just want to make sure that that's nice and clean. So I'm deleting the history on that, and then also on the sphere there as well. Once we've done that, we can select over both and Control G to group them together, and we'll give this a name, light 01 group. And then what we need to do is we want, at the moment we've got the pivot centered in the object, but we want the pivot at the base of this, so that when we run this through mesh, it actually rotates around the base and not the center point. So what I'm going to do is go into pivot mode and then hit D to go into pivot mode, and then holding the V key for vertex snap, I'm just going to click and drag down and point it at one of these corner verts. Back to my move tool, which is W, and then using the X key now I can drag up, and I know that's now going to be on the center on the floor. So I'm also just going to make sure that my pivot point for my sphere is set to the floor, and also just to double down and make the base of this, set that to the floor as well. Last thing to do is currently our group has a translation value of 3, so we're just going to freeze that out to make that 0. So select your group, up to modify, down to freeze transformations. Cool. So just going to have that smoothed. The next thing is we may as well create the curve that these are going to run along. So up to create, down to curve tools, and then I'm going to use the CV curve tool. And I'm going to go into my top view, and I'm going to just draw a simple curve. And then hit enter when I'm done. If I want to refine the shape a little bit, I can come in to my control, vertex, and shape these or delete as I see fit. So that's looking cool. Okay, so we've got our curve, and what we want to do now really is get a mesh to, we want to use this curve for our cable, right? So what we can do in Maya now, in recent versions of Maya, we've got this new sweep mesh tool, which is it's an amazing tool. It's really good for creating cables, rope, string, and anything like that. So with your curve selected, come up to sweep mesh, and what you should now have is a mesh that has been swept along this curve. So you have your different sweep profiles at the top here. By default we're selected to poly, but you can go along and you can trial some of these out. So you've got rectangle, line, arc, etc. We're going to use poly, and I think 8 sides is probably, well, let's go a little bit higher than this. Let's go to something like 16 and then turn cap on as well. The next thing we need to do is we need to use this distribution tab, because we've got 2 cables that are twisting around one another, and we've currently only got 1. So we need to add in another one. So we can do this by hitting this distribute checkbox, and this allows us to instance that our original cable, so that we can get some really cool, interesting effects, create that sort of multi-threaded look. We only need 2 for this example, and scale instances I'm going to set to 1. And then I'm coming down to where it says twist, and I'm going to, oh, that's gone a bit high there. Control and drag in that little box there will sort of interactively and dynamically show you what's going on in the viewport. And what we want to do is, we don't want to go too mad with the twist, but we do want it to mirror what we have in our reference over here. So I don't think that's too bad, to be honest. Something like that, I think that's good. We can, if we are concerned with the polycount, if we've not got as much detail, or we need to lessen the detail, then if you hit your 4 keys, you can see the wireframe. By default, you're set to this precision point of 75, where you can change this number and you can decrease or increase as you see fit. You can also check on optimize, and what that will do is it will try to give you more polys in the places where it thinks that you need it. I'm going to leave that off for a minute. You also have some different modes, but I'm just going to leave these off, and I'm not too concerned with polycount at the moment. What's brilliant about the curve and the sweep mesh tool is that you can, if I select my curve, and then if I click off right mouse button and go to control vertex, is that it's dynamic and interactive. So because it's procedural in nature, the curve tool, it means that we can visualize what our mesh is going to do when we manipulate that curve. So that's awesome. Makes it really sort of art directable. Okay, so I'm going back to object mode, and now that we've got that, we're pretty much ready to get our lights along that curve. So we're going to use mesh, and we're going to grab the group for the light in the outliner, and then we're going to go up and make sure our menu set is set to animation. We're going to go to mesh, and then we've got this little create mesh network, and we're going to the options box. If you don't see mesh at the top here, it may be because you just need to load the plugin. So to do that, you go to Windows, Settings, Preferences, Plugin Manager, and if you just search for mesh, you'll find you should find this here, and it might just be that you need to check these two boxes on, or this one box, the loaded box. Okay, so hopefully with that done, you can now see mesh, and we have the option of selecting a mesh or an instancer. So we're going to use instancer just because we'll get a little bit more performance out of mesh this way. But you might a little bit further down the line run into the occasional sort of sticking point with between instancing and using the repro mesh, mainly to do with shading. However, you can sort of dynamically switch between mesh and instancer. So we're going to stick with instancer for a sec, and then we're going to just leave it at the default. We're going to hit apply and close. And now what you should have is lots of little soldiers of Christmas lights running adjacent to the center of the grid. So that's cool, but we want to get them across our curve. So to do that, we need to make sure that we are seeing this waiter on the right hand side in our attribute editor. If that is true, then we can click here on the curve node and add a curve node. So this wants us to drop in a curve into this box over here. So luckily we have one in our outliner that we created. So what we're going to do is middle mouse click and drag from that curve and drop it into this box over here. And that's cool. So we got something going on. You might be able to see that it's sort of working, it's slightly coming off of this path, and that's because in the mesh distribute node we've got a distance parameter in here, so we just need to zero that out, and then that should stick to that curve pretty well. I'm just going to increase the number of points a little bit, and obviously the other thing you're probably asking is, well, they're all, why are they all at the start of this curve? And the reason for that is in your mesh curve settings we've got this step distance, and you can sort of view that as a percentage of the whole curve. So it's 0.1 would be something like 10% of the curve. So if we set this to 1, then that's going to span the whole curve there. So that's awesome. And now it's really about getting this to look how you want it to look. So I'm not going to tell you how to do that, but you can come in and add in things like a randomized node. So often with Christmas lights or you know, any lights that have been wound, you'll get the, you know, odd or even lights that are sort of oriented in the opposite direction. That's the nature of the tension in the wire. So we can do that with the sort of randomized node, or we could do it with the offset node. But if you take the position out of the random nodes and then add in your rotation, you can see rotation X is giving you a bit more of, you know, it's still random. It's not entirely, you know, still randomizing between all of them. However, you have things like the seed, so you can change the way that this looks. But yeah, there's the, you know, Mesh is really powerful, and you know, we're only sort of dipping into it a little bit here, but you could go ahead and play around with this stuff. As we were saying earlier, that, you know, the beauty of using that sweep mesh and also using the instancer in Mesh is that, you know, we still have our original light here, and anything we do to that will be reflected in the instancing. So if we wanted the lights to be bigger, we could scale these up, or smaller, we could scale them down. You know, lots of things we could do, and the same goes for the curve. So, you know, just because we've got those instances along the curve doesn't mean that we still can't affect that original curve. So that's really nice, being able to have that sort of control, and it's non-destructive like that. Okay, so that's looking good. You know, if I wanted to change the profile, or if I wanted to change the size of that cable, I could do that as well. So let's just you know, apply a couple of shaders. So for the Christmas, for the housing for the light, if we come down to assign new material, so I'm holding right mouse button, assign new material, and then I'm applying a new AI standard, and let's go to our presets and go for something like plastic. Plastic comes in with a subsurface value as well, so we'll change the base color to, you know, a dark green, and the subsurface color, we just need to make sure it sort of makes sense in terms of, you know, that it's not blue with the green. Okay, and then so that works for the housing. We could probably apply the same material to the sweep as well. Let's just check that's applied. Yep. And then for the light bulb, you know, we're not going super detailed with this. So for us, let's, like, I'm, you know, it's just planning on using an emission value in the AI standard. However, you could definitely play about with the Arnold mesh lights, and if you needed something a bit more that had a bit more power in emitting light, you know, you wouldn't want to rely on you know, the emission slot to emit, you know, a certain amount of light across your scene, but it will certainly hold up for, you know, for mid to background assets that need to have a bit of that sort of incandescence. So we're going to use emission in the color. We're going to change that and just give it like a warm white sort of color, something like that. So that's cool. And then we can hide the original now. And now it's time to, yeah, to unhide the sky dome. And oh yeah, let's have a look through our other camera. So you don't have to get a camera set up if you don't want. However, I've just gone up to create cameras. I've placed a camera, and then I've gone to panels, and I'm looking through that camera there. So what we can do with that camera is perhaps we can give ourselves a different focal length, something a bit more sort of zoomed in, or like an 80mm or something like that. Ooh. And then the other thing that we can do is just well, let's start a render off, see where we are. I'm going to move this pure ref thing out of the way. So open Arnold render view. We're going to hit the play button. Okay, what you can see is it looks very blue, and that is, you know, a lot to do with the HDR. So it's the lighting that we have in the scene. So that's why it's always good to sort of know where your lights are going to be and what sort of environment they're going to be within. If we wanted to, we could change the values of our, you know, subsurface values. Let's keep that green, but let's make the other one a bit darker. And then perhaps, well, let's just leave it there for a minute. So that's cool. Let's, with the camera, so I'm going up here and hitting select camera, and then in my attribute editor, if we come down to the Arnold drop down, we've got things like enable depth of field. So I'm going to check that on. Picture size, I'm going to increase that. Let's start with a higher number like 2, and let's increase the blades, and let's change our focus distance. At the moment we're set to 5 units, so let's increase that to like 140. That's just a guess. Again, you see we're getting somewhere. If we need to be exact with this number, we can place a cube in the scene, and if we get our move tool and hold V, we can middle mouse click and sort of drag this around. And that, now if we come up to display, heads up display, I've got this checked on, so object details, that's here over on the right hand side. So you can see now distance from camera, that's 603. So I'm just coming in to my camera, focus distance 603. Now that should be sort of focused on the cube there. Okay, we've also got the images, so we've got post-process effects in our render view. So you can come down to lens effects and you can increase your strength if you want to have a little look at what some bloom would look like. And then we can change the radius, we can change the strength, etc., etc. But have a play around. Okay, well, yeah, that's it. Thank you very much for watching along, and I hope to see you next time. Cheers.